We're getting near the end of the year. It's December. Wow. Time flies when you're having fun. Yep. And this perhaps is the most important message I've brought to you all year, I sense. So would you pray with me as we begin? Holy Spirit, we just want to be open to you and to what you're doing and saying today. Give us ears to hear. Give us hearts to receive. Give us a will that will submit to you today and follow you because we love you, Lord, and because you love us so much. Have your way today, Lord. Have your way. Come in these moments and change us. Love us. Amen. Well, we've been for a few weeks thinking about this idea of overflow, as Brian mentioned, and today will be the last time I touch on it. I think Mike's going to touch on it next Sunday. But it's really an important concept because Jesus has left his church with a message to bring to the world. We call this evangelism. This is our role that we play to tell others the good news of Jesus. That's simply what evangelism means. I know it's a confronting word, it's a huge word, and it sounds confusing, but it really just simply means telling good news. Telling good news. And the gospel is the only thing in terms of world religions that is news. Every other religion is giving you advice on how to get right with God and the steps you ought to take in order to get restored with God. But the gospel is something altogether different. It's news. It's news. It's news. It's that God has already done all of this stuff. And the news is if you accept it, you are put into a new place of honor and you've moved into a royal family. And we've been saying over these weeks, if we get that really clear, if we understand how much God has done for us and the amazing grace that we're singing about this morning, it would overflow from us. It would stir up a passion in us that would come forward in our conversations with others, because what we're most passionate about spills over, right? We've been saying if it's football for you, then guess what? You end up talking about football. If it's fishing, you end up talking about fishing. If it's gardening, if whatever it is in your life that you actually really care a lot about, eventually will make its way out of your mouth. It's just life. It's a principle. We don't have to try for it. It just happens. It's the way we are. And so you cannot hide that which you love most. If we are in love with Jesus Christ, if we are filling our 168 hours of the week with him because our love relationship with him is so strong that we want to build into that and invest in that and fill up on that, it would overflow. It would overflow. Now, in many of our cases, it's not. So then we have to ask, what's happening then? What's blocking that from being the case? We've been looking at that in recent weeks. We talked about a theology of suffering, understanding that life is difficult and even life following Jesus is difficult. Sometimes more difficult, actually, because we all of a sudden have an enemy that wants to challenge us. And so there's challenges, and we need to have a theology, a mindset to approach that. Our balloon will be popped. Last week I talked about, what did I talk about last week? Lydia. Only God can open a heart. I'm glad you remembered because I had a mind blank there for a moment. So only God can open a heart. And so I talked about not playing God. If you want to have your joy meter back on zero, you start trying to play God. You start overreaching in this process. You start thinking it all depends on you for people to be saved and for people to be changed and for people to come to know Christ. It doesn't. Our role is to take opportunities. God's role is to open hearts, we said last week. And there's a profound difference, and we need to understand the difference, or else we'll be trying to play God in the lives of other people. And we're underqualified to do that. It's way too hard for you and for me. Well, today I want us to come to this point of considering offences. And if we don't deal with hurts in our lives, it will rob us of all joy, and certainly we won't be overflowing. And I want us to look at 1 Corinthians 13, So if you've got a Bible there, please turn there. 1 Corinthians 13. Now, this is known as the love chapter in the Bible. It often gets read out at weddings and other such happy occasions. However, it's not addressing a happy environment. In fact, it's a church in chaos here at Corinth, relationally, as well as every other way possible. They thought their spirituality was a competitive sport, and so they were all trying to get one up on each other so that they looked more godly than the next person. So they were showing off their gifts to one another and their talents and their abilities. And in particular, what we call the sign gifts were really important in this context. The speaking gifts, so like things like tongues and prophecy and even miracles, anything that related to the stage was a big deal to them. And other tasks that are involved in church, like, for example, setting up, like the seat you're sitting on this morning, someone actually had to physically set that up here, but you didn't see them. That's all unseen ministry. Well, the Corinth church was not interested in those sorts of jobs, in the sorts of tasks that nobody noticed. They were all about creating a pecking order. And this is the immaturity that's being addressed in the church. In fact, when we read here that love is like this and love is like that and all these descriptors, it's really a rebuke saying you're nothing like that. You're nothing like being kind or being patient or being godly, because of the way they were acting towards one another. 1 Corinthians 13, and I'm reading from verse 1, says this: if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. In the first century, asceticism is the worldview that to suffer much is to be godly. And this is what's being reflected here with that statement. Because Jesus suffered much, if I suffer much, I'm like Jesus. So there was people that actually aimed to suffer for that reason. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. So in terms of the context here, he's saying I had an immature version of love. I didn't understand these things. It was just all about me. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. When Christ comes, how great will that be? Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. This is the word of God. May the Holy Spirit open our hearts to it today. So here's the question I've got for you. How do we show love? How do we grow in the maturity and the qualities that we just read about? Sometimes the best way of describing what something is to describe what something isn't. And Paul does a lot of this in his letter here in the 13th chapter of Corinthians. As far as I can tell, the ratio is 10-7. In other words, he names 10 things that love is not, and 7 things, which happens to be God's perfect number, of what love actually is. And I've put these on the board here so you can see it a little bit more clearly. So I've gone through the reading and put them on one side of the category or the other. So love is not verse 1 and 2, how gifted you are. That's what he's saying in those first couple of verses. Love is not sacrifice, as in asceticism, like I mentioned before. So it's not, willingly sacrificing, suffering in that sense. Love is not envious. Love is not boastful. Love is not proud. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. Love does not rejoice over evil. Love does not fail. So they're the things that love doesn't do, 10 things. And there's 7 things over here. Love is patient and kind. Love rejoices in the truth. Love protects. Love trusts. Love hopes. Love perseveres. Now, I don't know what stands out to you as you look at that list, but it just stood out to me like a sore thumb as I was looking at either side of the page here as I'm writing them out this week. Very, very clear to me that one side reflects human love, what we would normally anticipate in relationships with other people, and the other side is a clear indicator, a description of godly love. It's only if we're walking in the fullness of the Spirit that we have any hope of moving to this side of the ledger and beginning to do those things. Otherwise, they're not in us. This is godly love, and I don't have it apart from Him. For the sake of focus this morning, I want to drill down really on verse 5 and consider what it says there. There's one particular characteristic about love that I want us to think about this morning. It says, love does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered. These last words here, love keeps no record of wrongs. Love keeps no record of wrongs. If you're reading from a King James, it'll say, love thinketh no evil. In other words, it doesn't dwell on what people get wrong. Love thinketh no evil. Love keeps no inventory of evil is the literal meaning of it. So it doesn't sit there and dwell on the mistakes of others. Love doesn't do that. Back in June, we had a church review, and Christine Wanstill came, as she often does, and consulted with us and helped us hear what God's saying in terms of our next season as a church. Now, some of you gave up a big chunk of your Saturday, and I really, really appreciate the feedback you gave and your participation in that day. After you left, the leaders stayed behind for extra time, and we spent time with Christine, and she gave us a bit of a summary, I guess, of what her perspectives were on the day. And she drew a picture for us before she left. Now, interestingly, she said God gave her this picture 2 years ago when she first came to New Life, but she didn't feel it was right to share then. So she shared it just as she was leaving, and she hurriedly drew this picture for us, which I've been sharing around. I shared it at the AGM, I've been sharing it at leadership meetings, I've been sharing it at the prayer meeting in the last couple of weeks, with a view to try and understand what is God saying to us through this picture. Now, here is the picture. It's a picture of wheat, and the wheat is supposed to be green, but it's sagging over. Now, it's positive because the heads of wheat are full, so it's a big harvest. But I suppose you could say it's concerning because the wheat is bent over. And we've been praying over this and asking, what does this mean? And it seems to me like God is saying, and I say seems to me because we just read today, we know in part and we prophesy in part, right? So we've all got bits and pieces of the puzzle. But as I put those puzzle pieces together, as I have done over recent weeks and heard from all different people about this, thank you to the many people who have shared insights on it. My sense is God is saying that offence has got into the church and it's affected our mission. I mean, the mission is great. The mission is exciting. And yet we are disabled, if you like, by offence. So we're bent over and the mission isn't progressing as well as it could. Now, that's my current understanding of it. I think there's perhaps more than one meaning here as well, but that's certainly one of the key ones, that part of the reason we as a church are not flourishing to the fullness we possibly could is because people have been hurt. Now, I hope that the hurt that's occurred inside the church is unintentional. I hope no one's hurting each other on purpose. But regardless of that, it happens. We human beings misunderstand one another, and we often communicate one thing and another thing is received. And we have expectations, don't we, on each other about how things will play out, and sometimes they don't play out. However, I don't want us to be robbed of joy by living in offence. And I want us to not only understand what this picture means, I want us to be able to process it and get free of it, but also not just to repeat the same old thing. I mean, if we next year hurt people again, and if we next year are still taking offence and not growing beyond that, there's something wrong. Love keeps no record of wrongs. So today I want to ask you, what's underneath our capacity to take offence or not? What's underneath that? Do we have a choice in the matter? When hurt comes our way, is it possible for us not to be shipwrecked by it? Now, I know we're in church, and so you're going to give me a nice Christian response. You're going to say, yes, of course it's possible not to take offence. But how? How do we not let offence and hurt get on top of us? Now, I'm going to give you a really practical example because we need to be practical this morning. Here's the scenario. Two of you people here have the same relationship with Bill, right? And Bill's having his 50th birthday. And he invites neither of you. Surprise, surprise. You thought you were going to be invited, but for whatever reason, maybe Bill was cost-cutting, maybe he couldn't afford to have many people at his party, maybe he thought if it was a pay-your-own-way, you couldn't afford to come. I don't know what was going through Bill's mind, but whatever it was, he didn't invite either of these two people who expected to get invited. Now, one person is fine, goes along as though nothing's happened, and sees Bill and is friendly to Bill and has no baggage about that situation. And the other person is distraught. The other person deletes Bill off social media. The other person wants to avoid Bill for the rest of their life. And Bill is crossed off their Christmas card list. And they don't want anything more to do with Bill because he didn't invite them to his birthday. What happened? How come for this person it meant nothing, or so it seems, and for this person their whole world's just caved in? What's going on there? I'm going to get you to yell out a response in a moment if you have one. How come the offence for one was so great and the other person seems to be unaffected and unharmed by the situation? So how do we get to this place that Corinthians is calling to us this morning? Love does not keep a record of wrongs. How do we get so much better at forgiveness so that we don't get paralysed by offence when things like that crop up? How do I get better at not taking offence and being more resilient? Or to ask the question in a more proactive way, how do I get better at forgiveness? How do I get forgiveness ready? So even before a hurt's come along, I'm already operating in forgiveness. Bitterness just has no hold on me. How do I get to a place where people aren't walking on eggshells around me because they're scared that they're going to hurt and offend me because I'm so sensitive? How does all this work? What impacts on us taking offence or not? Anyone want to yell out a response? Act of your will? You've gone right to the bottom. I was thinking like some more surface stuff like personality type first, but I think that's very true. But I think our personality type has something to do with this. Some people are just going to shrug that off and not think too deeply about it, and somebody else is going to go away and analyse, wonder why I didn't get invited to the party, I wonder what he's got against me, I wonder, we're different personality types, aren't we? And that's part of it. Sorry, you're going to... Being confident, in who you are. So I think our upbringing has something to do with that. If we were raised to know that we have value, to know that our identity doesn't depend on being invited to a birthday party or not, right? So, Brian, you're going to... Trust in God. Yep. Trust in God. Cool. Giving it over to God. Sharon? Past history of rejection. Yes, very true. So if you haven't been invited to a birthday party for 10 years, and you thought this was a friend, and then that one doesn't come off either. It's like, oh, you begin to ask, what's wrong with me? Or you can. So all of these things play a role, aren't they? Some of you are going to say, well, that guy's just emotionally he didn't feel anything because he's not in touch with his emotions, and that could be true as well. There's so many different things, isn't there, that could be playing a part here. Anyone else? Or have we kind of covered it? Karen? Choosing to love instead of choosing to take a hurt. Yeah, cool. Hayley? Yeah. 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 So being careful of the story you're telling yourself and making sure the enemy's not taking that and twisting it to tell you a negative story. Bottom line is, if we take offense, we end up looking like this, right? Like that bent wheat. And we might think, oh, nobody's noticing. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Hurt is what happens to me. Offense is what's happening in me, right? Hurt is what's happening to me, and I have no control over that, really. If someone's going to start attacking me with a sword this morning, all I can do is defend myself. But I really can't control their actions, but I can control my response. I control the way I think about them, whether I go away hating that person or not. I have very little control over hurt. That comes from outside. I have plenty of control over offense because that comes from inside. That's an internal job. Offense is totally up to me. And it means I walk in love if I don't hold offense. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't take notes on other people's mistakes. Love doesn't get out the notepad and write notes about what they got wrong yesterday. And then take that home and read over it and remind yourself again the following days and weeks and months and years that that person hurt you. So I think God's message to us today is this. We'll go back a screen. That's capturing what we just said. How hurt becomes an offense, what happens to me versus what happens in me. We need to stop accumulating hurts. Stop storing up. Stop keeping a record of wrong. Stop watching the same old negative movie. It's dark, it's depressing. Change the channel. Move on from offense. Break the shackles and tell yourself a new story. No human being deserves to control the way you feel. They don't. And I think what Sharon mentions is really, really important for us, because if we've been busy accumulating, it doesn't take much to tip you over the edge. It's what we call, disproportionate responses. Disproportionate responses. So it's when I'm already 9 out of 10. And then someone just does that little thing and it tips me over to being this outburst of anger, when really that thing all in isolation by itself, not being invited to a birthday party, is not supposed to tip me over the edge, but it can. It can if I've already been accumulating and my needle's already over here. I don't need much to break me. Does that make sense? Stop accumulating. Stop accumulating and start processing. God gives us enough strength for today. But God never, ever, ever, ever promises enough strength to accumulate hurts from yesterday. God never promises enough grace to hold on to the baggage of 2017. He doesn't. He says, let it go. You're not designed to carry it. And the reason some of us struggle to process what happened in 2018 is because we haven't dealt with 2017 and 16 and 15 and 14. And you get the picture? And what's going on back there just gets replayed. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a competition of how stone-faced we can be in the light of oncoming hurt. But what I am suggesting, if you spend more time on the ground than you do walking, moving forward, there's something wrong. There's something wrong, something profoundly wrong. We are meant to be overcomers in Jesus. And that doesn't look like me being a mess on the floor every single day. Sure, there's days where I get hit for 6, where I get surprised by things. However, if I spend all of my days just flat out knocked out with no life in me, something's wrong. Something's wrong. I've probably been accumulating, and I'm struggling to continue underneath the weight of all of the hurts of yesteryear. Make sense? I heard Rich Wilkinson say this week, if you never heal from what hurts you, you'll bleed on people who never cut you. If you never heal from what hurts you yesterday, you'll bleed on people tomorrow that have got nothing to do with it. You may remember a few months back me referring to this picture as an illustration of a hurt coming into our lives. It's kind of like a brick hitting the water. And when that happens, it's a big deal. It creates a big splash. Everybody can see it. Everybody in our world is even affected by it because it's caused such a big kind of splash, big interruption to the peace in our world. But over time, the hurt begins to fade. We may not actually process it and deal with it properly and forgive, but we kind of find a way of just placing it, of just letting it go, I suppose, but not really and truly dealing with it. So what it looks like over a period of months or maybe even years is the splash turns into a very little ripple. And only the people that were around back there actually know what happened. I mean, a new person looking on sees calm waters and thinks your life is going splendidly. We decided it was too hard to get in there and dig that brick out. It was muddy, it was messy, it was potentially dangerous. Could slip over and fall in, or totally underwater. So we decided to just let it go. And sure, the splash dies down and the water level sort of returns to normal. However, let's be super clear. It's a new type of normal. It's a new type of normal. And it's not a good and healthy normal. And just letting the bricks go in there underwater and thinking they're okay because no one can see them anymore. No. Doesn't work that way. That's not healing. And that's the disproportionate responses that we get to hurts today, because what happens is life brings another brick along, right? It will. Life just does that. Life is this continuation of bricks coming and hitting us. And it's how we respond to them that is the big deal. And it determines whether we're just hurt, and we ought to be honest about that, or whether we actually got into offence and we've got stuck by that hurt. So you say, Jono, what am I supposed to do? You just want me to be a faithful Labrador that keeps coming up to the doormat and getting booted around and getting treated like I'm nothing and being bullied and being treated like an animal? Is that what you want? Well, no, I wish some of you would discover biblical anger, actually. We don't have time to go there today, though. Let's stay on this train of thought. How do I untangle myself from offence, or how do I stop myself being hurt in the first place? And I want to give you a survival kit for relational knocks, because there's more knocks coming your way. There's more bricks heading into that water. Believe you me, they're coming. They're coming to a store near you. And if you can't think of any hurts in your life, or you can't think of any people that cause you pain, there's people in the room that will be willing to share some. So come up later and we'll write a list and we'll distribute some names, okay? There's plenty of people out there that are just about me. And they have no self-awareness or interest even about how their actions are affecting others. But if you keep bumping into them time and time again, and they're just making mincemeat out of your heart, you got to change something. You got to learn from that. And I like the wisdom of John Maxwell. He says, when we hit failure, when we hit hurt, we've got to test, fail, learn, improve, re-enter. He says what we often do is just fail and then re-enter. We never actually go through the process of stepping back and say, what was I supposed to learn out of all of that? Pain only is useful when we're learning from it. So amidst a fallen, broken world, brimmed with misunderstanding and hurts and upsets and offences and nasty exchanges and gossip and slander, and dare we go on, let's face it, we'll all face tests. But when we do, let's not get out our notebooks and start documenting how hurt we are or how nasty that person was or how we should write them off. Let's learn to navigate this space and grow in wisdom so that we can be relationally healthy. So how do we protect our heart? Now, the question I'm asking now is on the front end. So before a hurts happen, or you could look at it retrospectively. So you've had a scenario. What are you supposed to learn from it in order to do the next relationship better? I'm using Craig Groeschel's wisdom here where he says differentiate between honour and respect. Now, some of you have heard me say this before, but it really applies today. And let's understand this really, really, really clearly. Honour is given, respect is earned. So the difference between the two is everybody ought to be in your honour category. Everybody. Because they're human beings made in the image of God. They deserve to be honoured, whether they hurt you or not, whether you can think of them as a good person or not, whether you agree with their worldview or not. Every single person on the planet is worthy of honour because they're made in the image of God. Very few people are worthy of respect. Very few people. Don't expect too much of people. God has given us a handful of people, probably this many or less, that we actually should share the totality of our hearts with. The Bible says, guard your heart. I'm not talking here about being cynical. I'm talking about being like Jesus. What did he do? He had his crowd of 72. He had his tribe of 12. He had 3 friends. He had 3 people that he was totally vulnerable with. He honoured the masses, but he actually only gave his heart to very, very few. And this is part of our issue here. We give our heart away far too easily. We let people speak into our lives that really shouldn't have the right to speak into our lives. Differentiate between honour and respect. Everybody deserves honour. Very few people deserve your respect. Make them earn it. Over time, watch their behaviour. See that they're trustworthy. See that they keep their word. See that they're not passing on your information to others in a negative way. And then over time, you respect them. You say, should I tell them that? Should I tell them they're working along this? No way, of course you don't. It just happens. It's fluid relationship. But after 10 years of being friends with someone, you can actually mentally say, oh, I respect that person. But until then, hold it off. You lose nothing by making people earn your trust. You lose nothing by making people earn your trust. You lose plenty by giving your trust away too soon. Differentiate between respect and honour. Guard your heart. The Bible says, above all things, guard your heart. Don't give many people too much access to your heart. I'm talking about full disclosure to everything that's going on in your world. That ought to be reserved for few. We need to wind up this morning. We've run out of time. I really don't want to let you go, though, without challenging you. How are you going with this? Have you let some hurts turn into offences? Have you let some hurts turn into offence and grow and get ugly? I don't think there's anything more ugly than someone who claims to know Jesus but walks around with this big bag of bitterness attached to them. It's a horrible sight. There's no overflow in that. People don't look upon that and say, wow, I want to be like them. I mean, they just look so amazing. No. We look awful when we're claiming to have the hope of the world within and carrying this big bag of bitterness on our back. So what hurts are either in danger of turning to offences in your world right now that you need to process before God today? to ensure they don't end up having you all bitter and twisted and looking like that. What are you going to do about it? Because me holding offence offends God. Me holding offence offends God. After all that Christ has done for me, after all the forgiveness He's expressed to me, am I going to turn around and hold a petty thing against you? No way. What right do I have? What place do I have for that? Now, I deliberately used not invited to the party this morning as my example. I'm not minimising the deep hurts that some of us have got us in our lives that will take forever to get over. I know when there's deep abuse, we could be talking about 10, 20 years of processing. I'm not saying you should already have it done. I'm talking about attitude today. I'm talking about us opening our hands up to God and say, Lord, take it from me. It's too heavy, instead of operating with a closed fist and being angry and bitter against those that have harmed us. So this morning I'm going to play a song. It's an old hymn. It says, search me, O God. And I just love when God works in this way, because Marg came to the prayer meeting this morning saying, I really feel led to read this scripture. And she read, search me, O God, and know my heart. In one of the versions it says this, see if there's any offence in me. See if there's any offence and deal with it. And so I invite you to stand, and you might, if you feel comfortable, lift your hands before the Lord and just invite Him to search you as we close out with this song as a prayer this morning. Would you all stand?